A situation unfolded involving an arrogant boss that turned disastrous when he made a critical mistake related to an $800,000 project. This incident did not personally happen to me, but I was with a friend during the time he received a phone call about the problem. He explained the situation to me, and since he isn't on Reddit, I felt compelled to share this story, ensuring to change names for privacy reasons. The backdrop of this tale includes the UK's system for preserving significant historical buildings, known as listed buildings. These buildings are recognized for their historical importance, and there are strict regulations governing their development and maintenance. To protect the identities of those involved, I will keep the details of the work vague without sacrificing the core elements of the story. My friend, whom I will call David, is an expert in a very specialized area of construction. He specializes in repairing and renovating buildings using traditional methods that have not been widely used for centuries. David's work primarily focuses on conservation projects involving listed buildings. One of his recent assignments involved a Grade 1 listed property, where the main contractor was a company named ACC Limited. Due to the specialized nature of some of the work required, the managers at ACC Limited were at a loss regarding who could perform it. The architect provided a list of qualified individuals, and the contractor ultimately chose David because he had availability to start right away. However, 5 days into the project, the owner of ACC Limited arrived on site and began acting in a disruptive manner. He was loud and boisterous, making it difficult for David to concentrate on his tasks. David, firmly focused on his work, chose to ignore the boss's antics. During this time, the boss ordered one of his carpenters to fetch him a coffee. After a while, when the carpenter didn't return, the boss began complaining about delays and the financial impacts of the situation. 15 minutes later, he turned to David and asked where the carpenter was with his coffee. When David replied that he did not know, the boss reacted angrily, insisting that David should find out. David calmly explained that he was there to work on the walls and was not obligated to run errands for anyone associated with ACC Limited. The boss continued to berate David, dismissing his work status and demanding that he fulfill the coffee request. David stood his ground, stating he did not appreciate being spoken to in such a manner, and clarified that his contract only involved completing the wall work. The boss, feeling disrespected, lashed out, asking if David knew who he was. David responded affirmatively, indicating that he recognized the boss's arrogance. In a fit of rage, the boss fired David on the spot and ordered him off the site. David, however, remained collected. He pulled out his phone and began recording the encounter, wanting proof of his dismissal. The boss, now livid, attempted to grab the phone while shouting at David to leave. David stated he would depart, but wanted to ensure he had evidence of the interaction. After more heated exchanges, David gathered his belongings and walked away. Ironically, as he left, the site manager passed him with a coffee for the boss, smiling and joking about David's early departure. David responded, revealing that the boss had just fired him. The site manager looked alarmed, realizing the gravity of the situation. What neither David nor the boss realized was that only 7 people in the UK possessed the qualifications for this specialized work. David was the only one who could take on the project at time, and now he had 12 missed calls waiting for him by the time he reached home. It was now 2 working days lost, and David made it clear he would only return if he received proper compensation for the missed days and an in-person apology from the boss. When I met David, he was receiving a call from the site manager, who was desperate to fix the mess that had just unfolded. The unexpected firing had far-reaching implications that neither party fully understood at that moment. The boss has issued an apology but is currently out of the country and unable to offer a face-to-face apology to David. David also made a phone call to another specialist to inform them about the situation, but it turned out that they had all been contacted the previous Friday, pleading with them to take on the job. Unfortunately, none of them were willing to accept the work, as they are all fully booked with other commitments. Additionally, David reached out to the architect to alert him about the potential issue, explaining that in situations like this, some dishonest contractors might try to cut corners and pretend to do the work without actually completing it. David is determined to stand firm in his position and insists on receiving payment for all missed days, along with a face-to-face apology, which he is confident he will eventually obtain. I mentioned that I would be willing to pay anything just to witness the face-to-face apology unfold. In an update, one of the site managers called to inform David that he had received instructions from a rather loud and obnoxious person to threaten legal action if David did not finish the job. The site manager felt embarrassed and expressed his apologies for the situation. David took the opportunity to remind him that he had not quit and that he has proof of having been fired. Shortly after, the site manager called again to relay that the loud person would indeed offer a face-to-face apology on Friday and inquired if David could begin work tomorrow. David declined the offer, stating that following the legal threat, the terms had changed. He laid out 4 specific conditions that must be met before he would consider starting work again. First, he requires a face-to-face apology before any work resumes. Second, he demands payment for the days wasted. Third, he insists on receiving the total value of the contract upfront before work commences. And fourth, all these conditions need to be fulfilled by Thursday, as it is the last day he can start and still complete the project before his next scheduled commitment. If he also works on the weekends, he will just have enough time to finish everything. I asked David why he wasn't charging a significantly higher amount due to the unprofessional behavior he had faced. He replied that it does not reflect well on a contractor to take advantage of companies during stressful times, which he considers poor business ethics. It was then clarified that when David mentioned only 7 others doing this work, he meant there are 7 other businesses besides his own. He explained that these are small businesses, so it is more accurate to say there are probably around 20 people qualified to perform this type of work. While this number is still relatively small, it is not as laughably minor as 7. In a further update, it seems that an apology is no longer forthcoming. David discovered that the site manager had been blamed for not informing the loud person about the situation ahead of time, resulting in his termination. David then contacted the operations director at ACC Limited, the company where the loud individual works, to inform them that an apology was no longer necessary, as he would not be returning to the job. The operations director expressed regret about the entire situation and offered to renegotiate the payment terms very generously. David explained that he had only considered returning to the job as a personal favor to the original site manager, and since that manager was no longer present, he felt no obligation to go back. The operations director stated that he would get back to David, but did not specify the reasons for his delay. I was curious why he didn't simply say he would rehire the site manager, or David wouldn't return. David indicated that the loud person was too petty and weak to be told what to do by a skilled craftsman. Instead, it would need to be the company's decision to rehire the site manager. David believes the site manager is very good at his job, but since he is only 4 years away from retirement, it is not easy for someone at the age of 61 to find new employment. In the latest update, it was quite late, about 2 a.m., when we returned home from the pub. While we were out, David received a call from the site manager. Earlier that day, David updated the architect about the ongoing situation. The architect took the initiative to contact the site manager to recommend a company that was in need of a site manager. The site manager called David just before 9 p.m. I had to listen to the conversation, only hearing David's side, and I must have looked quite eager and excited during the call. Afterward, David filled me in on the details. The site manager called to express his gratitude and wanted to know David's favorite drink so that he could send him a bottle. Although he had not yet secured the new job, he was scheduled to meet with them on Friday. He mentioned that the architect's recommendation carries weight, making him feel optimistic about the opportunity. At first, David was hesitant, stating that he was not the one who got the job for him, but rather it was the architect who did. However, the site manager insisted that David had set everything in motion by informing the architect that he had been fired. "I've been fired, and because of that, I will never have to deal with that obnoxious person again." David, who was responsible for this situation, did not provide any details about who this annoying individual was, leaving us to speculate. He mentioned that his drink of choice is Cardo Gold Reserve, and he made it clear that he would only accept a bottle of this liquor under 2 conditions. 1. The site manager gets a new job, and 2. The site manager comes over to drink the whiskey with David. It seems that the skilled writer, referred to as the handsome scribe, who took on the significant and challenging task of documenting this saga on Reddit, is not included in the whiskey plans. In David's own words, he told the writer to piss off knobhead, suggesting that the writer should purchase his own drink. On a brighter note, it appears that no one will have the opportunity to witness the obnoxious person apologizing, which many were looking forward to. The fired site manager and David share a history outside of work as they are both involved in charity organizations within the same town, though they belong to different groups. The site manager is affiliated with the Rotary Club, while David is part of the Round Table. It's uncertain if David is a knight, but one can never be quite sure. The operations director for ACC Limited decided to reach out to David with a suggestion to bring the site manager back and renegotiate his pay. However, David firmly stated that they had missed the boat on that one. He explained that he cannot complete the project on his own before starting his next job, which is scheduled to begin on November 4th. There are at least 11 days of work remaining on the current job, and with only 10 days left, even if he works both weekends, the timeline simply doesn't add up. One can only imagine the scene when the obnoxious individual is informed about this turn of events. Many people are curious about what David actually does for a living. Revealing the specifics would be so identifying that it might as well expose his real name and address. The rarity of his role adds to the intrigue, as it typically takes 5 years of experience to become competent and at least 9 years to become a master craftsman in this field. It is essential that at least one master craftsman is present when any work is performed. In an update, there is some unfortunate news. The fired site manager did not secure the new job he was hoping for. Although he met with the new company, they ultimately decided not to hire him. The reasons for this decision are still unclear. David plans to meet with him on Sunday to discuss what happened. It is evident that David has mixed feelings about this situation, as he knows it isn't his fault. The site manager has indicated he will take action regarding his dismissal, claiming it was unfair. Initially, it seemed like a win-win situation for everyone involved, but reality often proves to be more complicated. As for the sacked site manager, the situation is not as dire as it first appeared. After speaking with him, it became clear that the company he met on Friday is not hiring him in the traditional sense, but they have offered him a fixed-term contract for 18 months to work on a distribution center project. Although this arrangement is not ideal, it does come with slightly better pay compared to ACC. Even though it's only an 18-month position, it's certainly better than having no job at all. There is also a possibility that the new company may extend the contract if additional projects arise in the future. David has heard rumors that a Bulgarian worker will be brought in to handle the project. When David shared this news, he was visibly pleased, believing he knows how the situation will unfold. He recalled a similar technique used in constructing some 19th-century buildings in Sofia. Although the methods may appear similar, two crucial materials differ significantly. David has made the decision to wait it out and let the Bulgarian complete the job first. After receiving payment, David intends to suggest to both the planning department and the client that they inspect the materials used. If the Bulgarian is unaware of the 17th century English techniques, he may have chosen the incorrect materials, which would necessitate tearing everything out and starting anew, due to the strict regulations governing this type of work. Despite understanding that it may not be right to wish for this outcome, David cannot help but hope it occurs. He acknowledges this makes him rather petty. Many are curious about when David will find out if the Bulgarian has executed the job correctly. Since there are only a limited number of suppliers for one of the required materials, David might learn the truth fairly soon. If the Bulgarian reaches out to these suppliers, the information should become available quickly. If the Bulgarian worker reaches out to them, David will hear his own words reflected back to him, noting that this part of the industry is quite small and interconnected, often resembling a close-knit community where people share information and gossip, much like older women in a small town. David acknowledges, however, that everyone engages in such conversations, implying that it is a common trait within the industry. Should the Bulgarian not make contact, David has decided to step back from the situation and refrain from getting involved until he receives confirmation that the work has been completed and that the Bulgarian has been compensated for his efforts. David is particularly mindful about not jeopardizing the Bulgarian's earnings. In his own words, he insists he does not want the Bulgarian to come all the way here only to leave without payment, simply because of his own impatience to share trivial details. He recognizes the man's need to earn a living and is willing to wait for clarity. To avoid any misunderstanding, he emphasizes that silly bollocks refers to the same person as noisy gob's height, underscoring his frustration with this individual. David estimates that the Bulgarian should require approximately 3 weeks to finish the job, assuming he does not work on weekends. David has numerous contacts on the job site, as well as a few connections at the ACC headquarters, ensuring he will be informed when the project is completed. Consequently, he finds himself in a position where he must practice restraint and occupy his time for the next 3 to 4 weeks, all while trying to suppress his excitement, which feels akin to a child eagerly anticipating Christmas. In an update, David reveals that he has learned the Bulgarian has already begun his work promptly and has received materials, although these were sourced from a standard building supplier. The specific materials needed for proper completion of the project were too cumbersome for the Bulgarian to transport from his home country, and he did not place an order with the appropriate UK supplier. Among the 3 suppliers available, only one has sufficient stock for the job, and they had obtained it specifically for David's use. Therefore, unless the right materials come by road and ferry, it appears the Bulgarian is not utilizing what is necessary. David is passionate about preserving the buildings he works on, and even if he were not frustrated with the noisy gob's height, he would not allow subpar work to go unnoticed. His commitment to historical accuracy further drives this dedication, highlighting that he cannot allow modern materials to compromise the integrity of the project. Consequently, he must maintain his patience for another 3 to 4 weeks. David suggests that if the Bulgarian uses modern materials, he might complete the project more quickly, whereas adhering to 17th century techniques typically requires about 3 weeks. David and the narrator have developed a somewhat unusual dynamic, particularly as the narrator called him earlier under a false pretense, seeking more information. David's response was witty, suggesting that if the narrator wanted to know everything, perhaps he should wear a body camera. The narrator humorously agreed, adding that being linked into David's phone calls would also be preferable. David, chuckling, retorted with a cheeky comment about whether it was acceptable to obscure the camera while engaging in intimate activities with his wife. The narrator acknowledged that he generally does not mix the two activities but left the door open for David's personal preferences. David's playful banter led to some teasing about the narrator's relationship, and the conversation ended abruptly without the usual niceties of farewell, highlighting a shift in their interactions. As the narrative progresses, an unexpected update arrives. The Bulgarian finished the job and returned home 2 weeks ago, as reported by individuals who interacted with him. Stefan, as the Bulgarian is named, is described as a diligent and hardworking individual, reportedly putting in 12-hour days, even during weekends, in order to minimize his expenses while in the UK. Based on this newfound understanding of Stefan, David is reassured that his choice to wait for payment before reporting any concerns about the work was justified. Despite his initial doubts concerning whether Stefan was performing the job correctly, David had already verified with the 3 UK suppliers of the obscure materials relevant to the project, finding no record of an order placed by Stefan. While it was conceivable that Stefan had imported the necessary materials, no one on site had observed an overseas order being processed. Proceeding with caution, David took the initiative to contact the local planning authority, the client, the architect, and an organization called Historic England, all while expressing his concerns in an unobtrusive and straightforward manner. He then awaited their investigation into the situation. The response time was brief, yet during the wait, the narrator experienced unprecedented anxiety and felt deeply invested in a matter that was not even his responsibility. The first report came in from the architect, who was understandably upset about the situation at the construction site. The problem arose because the contractor had not only used the wrong method but had also chosen the wrong materials for the project. Instead of utilizing the required 17th century English techniques, the contractor opted for a method from 19th century Bulgaria. This decision infuriated the architect, who expressed his frustration in strong language, a rarity for him. In fact, David Avid, who observed this phone call, noted that he had never heard the architect use such bad language before. The architect referred to the contractor as noisy gobshite, and even went so far as to call him an ignorant cockwomble. David was curious about the term, womble, and admitted he had no idea what it meant, leaving room for suggestions from others. The architect felt it was necessary to contact the local authority. He wanted to ensure that they did not associate the mess with his name. As for David, most of the information he gathered came through second or third-hand sources. David had connections with some of the staff at the local authority, known as ACC. When asked whether it was challenging to get information from them, he replied that they were eager to share. The urgency was apparent as the local authority planning officers made a visit to the site to inspect the ongoing work. They informed the contractor that everything done so far was entirely incorrect and needed to be torn down and redone properly. The situation escalated when the inspectors conducted a more thorough examination of the site. They uncovered a critical issue that, for confidentiality reasons, cannot be disclosed, as it might reveal the identity of the affected buildings. The contractor had inadvertently destroyed a part of the structure that was believed to be insignificant. However, this feature was essential for the roof's integrity. The contractors had removed it and replaced it with a modern support system, which, while better in some ways, was not permissible under the project guidelines. Neither the project manager nor the new site manager realized the significance of the internal feature they had removed. It was, of course, the contractor, referred to as noisy gobshite, who had ordered the cheap and quick solution instead of opting for the slower and more expensive repair process. This was a serious violation, as it is a criminal offense to destroy any part of a building of this nature. The consequences could involve jail time, or at the very least, hefty fines. In the wake of these revelations, confusion and blame seeped into the company, with everyone pointing fingers and denying responsibility. Noisy Gobshite claimed no involvement in the decision to remove the internal roof structure. However, the project manager had email evidence proving that he had indeed given that order. On Tuesday, the 19th, the client made the decision to remove all of the contractor's staff from the site. They ordered a comprehensive examination of the work done so far. It was almost certain that the contractor would be fired, and instructions were issued for new bids from other contractors. The client also planned to sue the original contractor for the costs associated with repairing and replacing the mistakes made. The architect's estimate for these repairs reached a staggering £800,000. Meanwhile, the local authority's planning department sent a formal letter to the contractor detailing their errors and alerting them to the upcoming inspection. This letter also hinted at the potential for prosecution. As news of this letter spread through the staff, some employees reported that Noisy Gob's Height had disappeared to consult with lawyers the very day it arrived. David received phone calls from 3 different individuals at ACC within an hour of the news circulating, all eager to discuss the situation. Now, several critical factors are pending. First, there is the client's inspection, which, if it confirms that ACC has indeed damaged the property, grants the client the right to terminate their contract with the current contractor. In that case, ACC would not receive any payment and would be left with substantial repair bills. Second, there is the local authority's inspection to be conducted by conservation experts. If they determine that significant features of the property have been destroyed, the local authority will prosecute not only ACC as a company but also the individual who authorized the actions taken. David's mood is quite low, as he knows that the internal structure removed cannot be restored. He reflects sadly on how this part of the building had functioned flawlessly for 400 years until the contractor's involvement led to its destruction. Now it is irreversible. David notes that Noisy Gob's Height must regret not preparing his own coffee that day last month. The letter sent to ACC did not initially threaten them with prosecution, rather, it informed them of the planning department's intent to send a specialist to evaluate the building, particularly the areas where changes had been made. It appears that any prosecution that may arise from this situation will take a considerable amount of time, further complicating the already precarious situation. I was overly eager to grab my pitchfork and assume the worst. A mix of wishful thinking and rumors meant that by the time the story reached David, it had transformed into something much more serious. There was talk that the Noisy Gob's Height might actually face prosecution. However, if that were to happen, it would likely take longer than 6 days, more realistically, around 6 months. This was the second correction I had to make since starting this. I had promised myself to be more careful with updates in the future. This miscommunication was my fault, not David's. He had warned me that just because something enters your ears, it doesn't mean it should come rushing out of your mouth. I was too eager to share information, thinking people might see me as someone special. While they might believe I have all the answers now, that perception won't last long if I keep messing up the facts. David was right, as he usually is, which can be quite annoying at times. A few people asked me about the former site manager who was let go, but I couldn't provide any details until tonight. David, the site manager, and 2 others met at a pub to discuss things. It turns out he has secured a new job, pending Fidelity insurance checks. He is expected to pass those checks and will begin working on February 9th. When he was terminated, he received a payoff instead of a notice period, which is standard practice in such situations. His contract required 3 months' notice, and he also had 12 vacation days owed to him. So, in total, he received just over 3.5 months' pay in a single lump sum. Moreover, he gets to keep the company car until March. He shared that when he was fired, he was shaking with anxiety, but his wife reminded him that he could take his pension early. He expressed his dislike for the company, especially for the dishonest individuals within it. After that, an architect reached out to him about a job at the distribution center, which eased his worries. He has now obtained that job, starting at a slightly higher salary. The only drawback is that the position is only guaranteed for 18 months, though there is a strong chance the company will retain him if there is enough work available. It's just not certain yet. Initially, he intended to take the Noisy Gob's Height to an industrial tribunal for unfair dismissal. However, with his new job secured, that option is off the table and he feels relieved about not facing financial loss. He mentioned that while he is grateful for the financial security, he had looked forward to the opportunity to confront his former employer in court. Currently, he is using his spare time to build a sleigh and some reindeer for a festive project. Yes, a sleigh, it's designed to go on the back of a truck. He and his group dress up as elves and snowmen, with Father Christmas riding on the sleigh, playing Christmas carols at loud volumes, and collecting donations for charity. I have been roped into this endeavor multiple times. He brought David the whiskey he had promised, despite David saying he shouldn't. The site manager insisted that Yorkshire men keep their promises, even to those he jokingly referred to as soft Southerners. He didn't want to risk breaking his lucky streak, and the whiskey was on sale. Both David and I pointed at him at the same time, saying he was indeed a true Yorkshireman. For those unaware, Yorkshire people are known for 2 things, being straightforward and being careful with their money. After giving him a hard time about implying I was a Southerner, we left the pub and headed to the site manager's garage to enjoy the whiskey and admire his work on the sleigh. If I tell you how good the Cardew Gold Reserve whiskey tastes, maybe they'll send me some freebies. I should mention that I am Welsh, hailing from near Carnarvon. This might explain why you've noticed some grammatical errors. I'm rambling now because I've had a bit too much whiskey, and it's 1 a.m. definitely past my bedtime. So, goodbye for now. As for the updates, I sense there may be some form of karmic justice coming. The noisy gobshite has been interviewed under caution. This doesn't guarantee legal action will be taken against him, but it indicates they are preparing for that possibility. They have done the same with the project manager, and next week they plan to interview the fired site manager as well. The site manager feels confident he has nothing to worry about. He clarified that the decision to remove the roof support sections was made after his termination. He believes that if he had been present during that time, things would have turned out differently. He had been present during the time of the illegal alteration, and it was evident that the individual known as Noisy Gobshite would have attempted to shift the blame onto someone else, presumably the site manager. A colleague might describe this individual as a cowardly, slinking person who would have eagerly placed the blame on me to save himself from any repercussions. Fortunately for me, the project manager possesses concrete evidence in the form of an email, which clearly shows that it was Noisy Gobshite who instructed the changes to take place. Despite this evidence, Noisy Gobshite tried to persuade the project manager not to share the email with the investigators from the local authorities' planning department. When that tactic failed, he resorted to threats. However, this approach backfired spectacularly. Not only did the project manager dismiss these threats, but he also took the initiative to inform the investigators that Noisy Gobshite had instructed him to destroy the email. I have a lawyer friend who has informed me that tampering with a witness and attempting to destroy evidence are offenses that carry their own legal penalties. Noisy Gobshite continues to dig a deeper hole for himself with each passing day. I will be sorely disappointed if he manages to escape without facing any legal consequences for his actions. Nevertheless, it is clear that he is currently experiencing significant distress, particularly with the major announcement of the week: Noisy Gobshite has been fired. David shared this news yesterday, on Saturday, after hearing from no fewer than 4 different employees of ACC who were eager to relay this information. During our conversation, I expressed my disbelief, asking how it was possible for the owner to be fired. Did he simply walk up to a mirror and declare, "You are as useful as Anne Frank's drum kit, you're fired"? David responded with a simple, "Nope." He continued to explain the ownership dynamics of the company, noting that Noisy Gobshite inherited the business from his father and uncle. I confirmed this detail. David elaborated that Noisy Gobshite's brother and cousin each hold a stake in the company, and their combined share exceeds 50%. As a result, they were able to dismiss him from his position. According to Louise, the accounts manager, the employees are immensely relieved. They were content to let Noisy Gobshite run the company as long as the profits kept coming in. However, with the current project in jeopardy, they are now deeply concerned that losing this contract, along with potential penalties and fines, could potentially lead to the demise of the business. Consequently, they are appealing to the client, the owner of the building, to permit ACC to continue the contract without any involvement from Noisy Gobshite. Clearly, they are attempting to throw him under the bus to ensure their own survival. Louise mentioned that there were loud screams and threats of violence from Noisy Gobshite at the time of his termination, and he had to be escorted off the premises by security. In the days following his dismissal, he has been reaching out to other employees, asking various questions, and seems genuinely surprised when they are reluctant to assist him. According to Louise, he appears to be under the delusion that the employees still like him and feel loyal towards him, indicating that he may not fully grasp the reality of the situation. I commented that he would likely be furious upon realizing what was happening, and David affirmed that this is nothing less than what Noisy Gobshite deserves. There was additional information that David was aware of but could not disclose due to a promise made to the individual who shared it with him. I inquired about the significance of this information, and David indicated it was considerable and potentially life-altering for the person involved. He conveyed this with a sense of urgency, stating that the news was so impactful it nearly caused him a heart attack. This piqued my curiosity further, and I couldn't help but make a light-hearted remark about how rare it is for anything to provoke such a response from David in that particular area. David confirmed that his wife was quite eager to learn about this piece of information, believing that as a married couple, he should share everything with her. He explained that, regrettably, it is not his secret to share. Despite recognizing the need for discretion, he mentioned that his wife has expressed her frustration with him and feels he is being unreasonable. Louise's job title has been changed to protect her identity, and it appears that it will take a couple of months before David can reveal the exciting news he has been entrusted with. Meanwhile, I was advised not to hold my breath in anticipation. The client, the owner of the building, has completed their inspection, and it has been determined that 2 areas are deemed unacceptable, which follows expectations. These areas include the one that was damaged and a part that David neglected to address but which was instead handled by Stefan. The building owner is unhappy with the situation. When damages occur to listed buildings, the local authority typically assumes the owner has taken shortcuts. However, in this case, the owner is a long-standing institution committed to preservation and restoration. The crusty old institution has long been committed to the preservation of significant buildings, working diligently to safeguard history and architecture. However, this respected establishment found itself in an unusual and uncomfortable position when accusations surfaced regarding damage to one of its properties. Historically, they had never faced such allegations and were not accustomed to having to defend their actions or intentions. David, a knowledgeable source on the matter, noted that it appeared the institution had given up on their relationship with ACC, as they had reached out to other contractors specializing in conservation work. He explained that they were essentially asking these companies to provide bids for the repair job, although the way he put it was filled with technical jargon that went right over my head. To simplify, they were looking for a few estimates for the work needed. While David's explanation was a bit too straightforward for someone not in the know, I appreciated the clarity. Yet, I had hoped that this story would build to an exciting climax, perhaps with the noisy troublemaker facing some sort of consequence. Instead, it felt like the whole situation had just fizzled out, leaving us in limbo as we awaited any news on potential legal action. Real life can sometimes move at a snail's pace. Fast forward to January 21, 2020, and I found myself reading a message from Mark's wife. She humorously mentioned that Mark had been quiet online due to a car accident he suffered on January 7. Thankfully, it seemed that he was on the path to recovery, but the reality was that he would not be engaging with the online world for some time. She noted that while it might seem trivial to some, Mark was particularly concerned about not letting his followers down, so she graciously took it upon herself to inform everyone. As time went on March 2, 2020, his wife updated us again, this time addressing the overwhelming response to her previous message. She thanked everyone for their well wishes and assured them that Mark had received all the messages. Then she tackled the most frequently asked questions. First, she explained the accident. Mark had been sitting in his car, waiting to exit the motorway, when an enormous truck struck him from behind. The impact crushed his car against another truck in front of him, resulting in severe injuries. He suffered multiple fractures, including a broken nose, a broken cheekbone and eye socket, several broken ribs, and significant damage to both arms and legs. Fortunately, despite the extent of his injuries, there was hope that he would not face any permanent damage. Mark's wife recounted how tough Mark had always been, even now as he lay in the hospital covered in injuries, wires, and tubes. Despite everything, he managed to make her laugh, showcasing his remarkable ability to lighten the mood. She mentioned that the thing bothering him most was his inability to use his hands, a difficult challenge for someone who enjoyed engaging with the world around him. The second question was about when Mark would return to his storytelling. She hinted that it might take a while, but reassured everyone that she could always get updates from their mutual friend David, though she humbly acknowledged that she couldn't tell stories like Mark. Finally, she addressed the heartfelt offers from others wanting to send cards, gifts, or money for Mark's medical expenses. With gratitude, she explained that while it was a kind gesture, it wasn't necessary. Living in the UK meant they had access to free healthcare, and Mark didn't want financial help from anyone. Instead, she suggested that if anyone felt compelled to do something, they could contribute to a charity they both supported, Macmillan Cancer Support. As the last update came in, it became clear how deeply interconnected the lives of these individuals were, with Mark's stories resonating with many and establishing a community that cared for one another in times of need. The incident with the institution and the ongoing saga of Mark highlighted how life can be unpredictable, and sometimes progress feels painfully slow. The story titled, Noisy Gobshite, was shared on May 22, 2020, by the username Slew, which belonged to my husband, Mark. Mark had been working on this story about his friend David and a business owner he referred to as Noisy Gobshite. He regularly updated the story and put a lot of effort into it. However, everything changed when he was involved in a car accident in January. After the accident, Mark asked me to inform everyone that he had been injured and would keep them updated on the story once he was better. Sadly, just over a week after I last commented, Mark passed away. Everyone had thought he was on the mend, so his sudden decline was shocking. Without any warning, he became unconscious and passed away quickly. Despite the hospital staff trying their hardest to save him, he had suffered a ruptured artery, likely due to injuries sustained in the accident. They explained that such damage is not uncommon in car crashes. I regret not updating everyone sooner about what had happened, but honestly, I completely forgot about this website. It was only when I returned to read Mark's words again that I realized how many people were waiting for him to finish the story. I am unsure how many will see this update, but if you are in contact with anyone who was waiting to hear from Mark, I kindly ask that you share this news with them. Thank you to the hundreds of people who sent get well messages for Mark. I sincerely apologize for neglecting your messages for so long. I have been in a daze for the past 3 months. Mark would definitely have disapproved of leaving everyone hanging and would have scolded me for it. I am also thankful to those who made donations to Macmillan Cancer Support in Mark's name, even though it feels unusual to see donations linked to the username, mostly grunt-led. Additionally, I want to express my gratitude to the moderators, especially you, Mari01, who guided me in figuring out how to communicate this news to everyone. On May 24, 2020, I expressed my appreciation for all the kind words and virtual hugs I received over the past day. I found myself crying for hours, and it's hard to describe the healing power of good crying after losing someone. Anyone who has experienced the loss of a loved one will probably understand this feeling. Because of your messages, much of my day has been filled with tears that also felt uplifting, as your words made me reflect on Mark's wonderful qualities and the countless reasons I loved him deeply. I began writing this update several times, but stopped about 8 times before mustering the courage to finish it. I am grateful I persevered. Once again, I appreciate the support from moderator you, Mari01, for providing the encouragement I needed to share my thoughts. This experience has also inspired me to do one last thing that I know Mark would have wanted. He always believed in finishing what he started. I plan to reach out to his friends to find out what has happened since his passing. I am somewhat aware of some updates, but I aim to gather information on everyone's situations. I must warn you that my writing will not mirror Mark's storytelling style, it will simply present the facts. I lack the flair he had, but it is clear from the comments that many are eager for a conclusion, so plain facts will have to suffice. I ask for your patience as I navigate this process. I will talk to David, the friend Mark often mentioned, who has been a tremendous support for me during this challenging year. I hope to gather as much information as I can and will share an update as soon as possible. Thank you all immensely, your support means more than you can imagine. On May 25th, I had a better day, largely due to the messages you all sent. However, I woke up today feeling angry, and I cannot shake that feeling. Today is a public holiday in England, and I keep imagining what we would be doing if Mark was still here. He never wasted a holiday, and I am furious because I lost the best person I have ever known just because some thoughtless individual couldn't wait to reply to a text message. I find it hard to cope with the sheer stupidity and injustice of it all. The person responsible will face some time in prison, but that won't bring Mark back. I apologize for venting, but I feel compelled to share my anger. I urge everyone to refrain from using their phones while driving and to speak out if they see others doing so. Lastly, I would like to acknowledge those who have reached out to me during this difficult time. Your kindness has been a source of comfort, and I am grateful for every message and gesture of support. Firstly, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to everyone who has taken the time to leave a comment. The beautiful and kind words you have all shared about Mark have truly lifted my spirits during this difficult time. I honestly didn't expect this support to have such a profound impact on me, which is why it took me longer than I had anticipated to share the news of Mark's passing. Your messages have provided comfort even when the emotions overwhelmed me, and I have found myself breaking down in tears more times than I can count while reading your touching reflections. Secondly, I would like to apologize for not yet responding to each individual comment. There are days when I feel capable of talking about Mark endlessly, while on other days, just thinking about him becomes too difficult for me to bear. If I haven't replied to your specific message, please know that it's not because I haven't read it, I've gone through all of them. It's simply that I have been in a dark place at times, which has made it hard to engage in conversation. I promise that I will eventually respond to everyone, just as I did, albeit very slowly, with the thank you cards I sent out after his funeral. At that time, looking at the pile of cards felt like I was facing a mountain that never stopped growing. However, I managed to write back to each of the 322 cards I received, finishing what I started. This is one of the many good habits I learned from Mark. I often find myself wishing to hear him call me Carrot again. While Carrot is not my name, it is a Welsh word that means love. On July 27, 2020, at 3:10 a.m., I realized that I hadn't been online for a few days. Upon checking, I was surprised to find hundreds of messages awaiting me. I couldn't sleep at that moment, and an idea struck me. I could provide an update on what had happened to each of the individuals Mark had spoken about. This will be purely factual information, lacking Mark's unique humor or style, but it feels important to share something rather than nothing. Starting with the site manager, he began his new role as planned on a building project for a distribution center. Mark had previously mentioned that both the site manager and David were unhappy with being on a fixed 18-month contract, particularly as self-employed individuals, because it posed disadvantages compared to regular employment. However, this perspective changed drastically with the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. When the virus hit, many employees were laid off, while some were placed on furlough. The site manager, on the other hand, had the advantage of his contract, which ensured that he continued to receive full pay. What initially seemed like a negative situation became a real saving grace for him. As for Noisy Gob's height, the last update David shared was concerning his forced decision to divest from his share of the business, meaning he no longer owned a third of it. He had to sign a personal liability agreement regarding his assets, which means that if the total liabilities of the company ever surpass its value, he would be responsible for covering that difference, even if it puts his own home at risk. He had to relinquish his stake in the company because they couldn't remain operational with him involved. Noisy Gob's height needs the business to continue running in order to pay for legal fees, as he has not yet been charged with any crime, but it is evident that charges are forthcoming. The legal process can take time, as investigators must prepare meticulously before proceeding to court. It has also come to light that Noisy Gob's height had received a warning in 2011 for similar, though less severe, damage to a listed building. Additionally, David learned that the local authority discovered some irregularities during their investigation, prompting them to refer the case to HMRC for tax-related fraud. An early comment on Mark's story mentioned that referring to it as an expensive cup of coffee is an understatement, and the focus was initially to be on Noisy Gob's alleged involvement in a sexual assault in 2017, alongside claims of sexual harassment of other staff members. While it is true that a sexual assault occurred, it was not committed by Noisy Gob's height but rather by a former finance director. The rumors surrounding the allegations of harassment against other female staff members have not materialized into anything substantial. On a different note, David seems to be one of the few individuals who have not felt the financial or work-related effects of the COVID-19 outbreak since he operates independently and has no issues with social distancing. He has been going about his work almost as normal. He mentioned that tasks feel easier for him because, in his own words, the usual troublemakers aren't around to mess with his equipment or stick wooden planks into his completed projects. However, on a personal level, David is struggling deeply, especially when it comes to the loss of Mark. He has taken Mark's death harder than anyone else. Although he tries to keep a brave face when he's with me, showing strength and support, I now realize that underneath, he is really hurting. In fact, he has been a solid support for me, helping to keep me grounded during my own grief. I thought I could confide in him about Mark, but I learned from David's wife last week that I need to be more mindful. She offered her sympathy, but also shared that I should hold back a little when discussing my feelings with David. Even though he appears strong on the outside, she revealed that Mark's passing is having a devastating impact on him. I knew that David and Mark shared a close friendship, and his wife confirmed that David has been deeply affected by this loss. She told me that throughout their marriage, she has only seen David cry once, when their dog passed away. She didn't see him shed tears when his own parents died, which highlights just how tough he is. Now, however, she says he seems lost and has cried several times since Mark's death. The hardest part to hear is that he cries after visiting me, which makes me feel terrible. It has become clear that he is grieving, but I didn't realize how much weight I was placing on him. Moving forward, I need to be more cautious and stop using him as a sounding board for all my pain. I wish he had opened up sooner about his feelings, or maybe I should have noticed his struggles instead of being so self-absorbed in my own grief. As for the updates on David, they are currently waiting to see what charges he will face. If found guilty of damaging listed buildings, he might face imprisonment. If he is guilty of fraud, it is almost certain he will go to jail. Regardless, the fines will likely be in the six figures. David even joked about whether prison coffee would be to his liking, showcasing his strange sense of humor. On July 27, 2023, at 3 a.m., I logged online and found over 500 private messages and comments waiting for me. I didn't even know where to begin sorting through them. To anyone who has written to me, please don't think I am being ungrateful for not responding right away. At 3:10 a.m., I felt a surge of emotion and decided to write this update. Now, however, I find I am struggling to continue. I have been watching our wedding video, hoping it would bring comfort, but instead, it hit me hard, as if I had been run over by a bus. Hearing Mark's speech from our wedding crushed me. He talked about the moment we met and recalled how, when he returned to the house he shared with other Royal Marines, one of them teased him, asking why he was so happy. Mark explained that he was unable to put into words how much joy our date brought him. He said he felt that way even on our wedding day, which initially made me smile but now brings tears to my eyes. This morning's memories broke me down completely. The pain does not seem to be easing, if anything, it feels like it is only getting worse. I can feel the weight of it throughout my entire being, and I can't seem to shake it off. My thoughts have turned dark, and I can't help but wish that if I can't have him back, I should have been in that car with him. Mark was an atheist and always said that life is all we have, so we should not waste any of it. He would not want me to harm myself, and I know that deep down. But carrying this pain is incredibly hard, and I just want it to end. I apologize for sharing this burden, but expressing it here feels like I am screaming into a diary. I appreciate everyone's concern, and I will do my best to regain some control. Yet, I miss him so terribly, and the hurt is unrelenting. I am at a loss for how to bear all of this. On August 31, 2020, at 5:25 p.m., I am writing to give an update since my last submission. I have managed to reply to many messages, but there are still hundreds more that I couldn't get to. The chat shows that I have 92 messages waiting for my response. If you haven't received a reply, you are among the 92. Yesterday marked our anniversary, August 30th, a day I was dreading. When it finally arrived, it felt rather empty. I watched our wedding video again, which made me cry. While responding to messages, I felt overwhelmed midway through one, reflecting just how raw my emotions still are. I was suddenly hit with a deep and heavy feeling, realizing that all the happiness I will ever experience in my life has come and gone. It feels like everything I try to do in the future will just end up being overshadowed by the thought of Mark. The constant reminder that he should be here but isn't makes everything feel empty and hollow. I can't help but think that from now until the end of my life, all I will be doing is existing, simply breathing and watching the days go by. This existence seems so pointless without Mark by my side. I struggle with the idea of whether I can even write anymore, as the words feel trapped and unexpressed. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who has reached out and offered their help during this tough time. You are truly wonderful people. Hold on tightly to the people you love, because you never know when you might lose them. Don't make the same mistake I did by assuming that you can keep living in your own little bubble of happiness forever. Life can change in an instant, and a careless mistake by someone else can snuff out everything you hold dear in the blink of an eye, leaving you with nothing but a dark and empty future ahead. Goodbye.